Many historians criticize Haile Selassie for being a tyrant and a puppet of Europe and America. What would you say in defense of those accusations against the emperor?
First, let me just greet your audience in that divine name, His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I, and say glory and honor the name of his chosen Queen Empress Waziri Menen. It's an excellent question that you asked. I have to set some context around the question before we can really talk, because a lot of people make these assertions based on the diplomatic relationships that were entered into by Ethiopia, by His Majesty, assuming that because it's a colonial power, there's a deal on the table that you are automatically a puppet. This requires greater scrutiny, and we have to look at the whole scramble for Africa. We have to look at the position Ethiopia found itself in too, at the turn of the century when His Majesty was rising to power. And what I find on this conversation is that it's a surface conversation. A lot of people are just looking at the surface and not really digging down. I would recommend to everyone to take a leadership position, first of all, because when you do that, you find out that practice and theory are two different things. So we have a lot of Pan-Africanists that are very theoretical, and they love, the ideal situation, which I think is one of the detriments to our movement. We're not looking at the practical reality. You also have to play chess, because you realize as a chess player, you have to play strategy. The other part I would say, and remember, I'm just setting up the context to answer your question, so I'm going to circle forward to the question. You have to know what is the information, because the decisions that you make, the plays that you make are based on the available information. So being on the outside, to be a quarterback coach, then you have the luxury of making an ideal situation, not knowing what the facts on the ground were. And when we look at His Imperial Majesty, during the scramble for Africa, 1884 to 1885, we have the Berlin Conference. So we have the European powers that are gathering at the behest of Otto von Bismarck, at the behest of Leopold, to divide up the continent. So Ethiopia's borders, or her neighbors, are all of these colonial powers. So you don't have an African base that is going to help you in terms of the aim of your independence and your liberation. So I can, make all of these great platitudes, but on the ground, what are the facts on the ground? In 1924, we have a young Rastafari who's 32 years old that goes to Europe, who is able to see the foreign militaries, to see the infrastructure, to understand or to overstand that, the kingdoms of Ethiopia, the ancient means of warfare, they were not prepared for what was facing them. Yes, they had won a tremendous victory at Adwa, but His Majesty realized that brute force alone or the heroism of our warriors alone is not going to secure the independence. We need allies. We have to balance the world powers against each other. So and remember that Europe, these colonial powers are players on the continent since the 1600s. We had one of the first Islamic jihads that was run by Ahmad Gran, the left-handed, who was working with the Ottoman Empire, bringing the first cannon into Ethiopia. So there was a geopolitical movement against Ethiopia from that time. Ethiopia defeated that jihad with the help of the Portuguese. So the European presence was always there. But we have to balance, because the Europeans are coming with superior military technology. And we're looking at an African kingdom that at the time of the turn of the century, Ethiopia is still not a unified, centralized body. You still have kingdoms that are operating independently when the Berlin Conference is happening. You have the kingdom of Tigray, you have the kingdom of Showa, you have Gojam, you have all of these independent kingdoms that are operating. So a lot of the detractors against His Majesty are not looking at what the dynamics are, because you have the British that are supporting some of the kingdoms, you have the Italians that are supporting some of the kingdoms. So even him coming as a young leader does not have the full control. He has to be very circumspect in terms of how he's balancing.
I don't want to deter from the argument, right? But I wanted to touch on, which is very important, that when he did come to power, that you're dealing with a nation that is divided not just culturally, religiously, but through language.
Yes.
So like,
excellent point.
can you touch on, and we'll get back to can you touch on like strategy he used to try to unify the country?
So one of the things that His Majesty we see from a very young age is the strategy of investing in the working people of Ethiopia. So he would take his own money, sending students from different tribes to universities abroad to get foreign education, because one thing he realizes that to implement his plan, he's going to need trained people. And a lot of the unification of Ethiopia was done through the educational system, which I would mention was also free. And this is revolutionary in the Ethiopian context, because the church was the primary arbiter of education in the country. It was only church education. And if you did not come through that church, there was, huge swaths of illiteracy in the population. The language barrier, as you said, we have over 70 tribes in Ethiopia. We have, each of them with different languages. So you can imagine coming to power in this situation. But the primary tool that His Majesty used was education. The Tafare Makonnen School for Boys that was set up. And again, he's not just educating the nobles, which was the practice prior to Ethiopia coming into this era. And I have to give credit to Emperor Menelik, Emperor Theodros, who instituted a system of education that was trying to unify the great houses or the races. But in terms of reaching down to the working people, to the farmer, to the trader, to those who were not brought into, it's unprecedented in terms of how His Majesty did this. And I would argue strongly that this is the reason that Ethiopia sticks together today, because a lot of these tribes, they were educated together. When we look at the Oromo Liberation Front, the leadership, when you look at the Tigray Party, the thing they have in common, they were all educated in this educational system. They went to the same academies. They got the same scholarships. The system of education in Ethiopia is unprecedented on the African continent. And I think it doesn't get enough highlight. And there's a reason that His Majesty reserved the Minister of Education to his own portfolio for the majority of his reign, is because he realized that unity was best preserved through education, through creating a common Ethiopian identity which didn't exist prior to His Majesty coming to power. Because even right now, we see that Menelik II, Emperor Johannes, there's a lot of backlash against these leaders, because the expansion of the Ethiopian territory during their reigns was primarily through war, through military expansion, ensuring that the smaller vassal kingdoms were brought under heel before they could be conquered by the neighboring European powers. And this has created a lot of resentment. But what did His Majesty do? He did not expand primarily through war. Yes, he built on the foundations that were set by his predecessors, but we find that was largely education. He was given the title Light of the World at his coronation, and that light was primarily installed through the educational system. There's also the military colleges. So Ethiopia is known for warfare. We defended our Ethiopian independence through bloodshed. And this is one of the distinctions. While the Ashanti fell, while the Zulu fell, while the Yoruba fell in other places of Africa, a lot of them prior to the birth of His Majesty, Ethiopia maintained her age-old independence because it was a warrior culture. And so His Majesty took that warrior culture and cultivated it through a system of military colleges and academies, to where Ethiopia now, even in the modern era, has one of the foremost military on the African continent, which has also helped it maintain its fragile unity. So education, to answer your question, is how that unity has been forged. Amharic being the national language, a lot of people may not like that. But when we look at China, how did China become a superpower? Was Mandarin always the national language of all of China? No. Mandarin was instituted during the reign of Mao Zedong. And China also has different kingdoms and nations that were subsumed into that Chinese identity. People can argue it was brutal. But when you look at the level of bloodshed that was avoided during His Majesty's reign by his practices and the outcomes in terms of the institutions, that all of the institutions His Majesty established still exist to today and are still allowing Ethiopia to flourish in the midst of all of that cultural animosity, I think is a testament to what he did to instill that unity again through education and building institutions.
All right. I want to touch on the tyrant claim, right?
Yes.
This is what I've learned from studying African history. I use Thomas Sankara particularly.
Yes.
He's a person I really rate and has been a great inspiration to me.
Definitely.
But depending on who you speak to and depending on what side they were on,
yes,
they will have a different argument for the person, right?
Yes.
Do you believe that's what occurred with Selassie in regards to who benefited from his reign versus who didn't benefit from his reign? Along with the European, because a lot of Europeans, it's very rare to see a European text that's not biased towards Selassie. And that goes into my second question, because just like they have a negative bias, Rastafari has a positive bias. And that's another question I want to get into later. But continue, like, how would you the claims in regards to being a tyrant, mismanagement of funds, and more than anything, the puppet vibe?
Yes.
And I think sometimes people tend to confuse diplomacy with being a puppet.
That is it.
But touch on those things so we can move on to this.
So when we talk about the let me take the puppet claim first and foremost, and the diplomacy. Ethiopia, first of all, what happened in Ethiopia is unprecedented in terms of the transformation from an ancient feudal monarchy to a modern nation state, constitutional monarchy in one generation that His Majesty did, working with what he did, working with the culture, all of the impediments, in the midst of foreign intervention, in the midst of a global war and a war in the country, is unprecedented. And how he was able to do that was balancing the foreign powers. Ethiopia is one of the few countries on the planet, maybe the only country on the planet, where the USSR was actively working and the USA. So we had both sides of the Cold War that were engaged in diplomatic relation. You had the USSR, for example, building the Assab Dam in modern day Eritrea during the reign of His Majesty, while you had the US with a military base in Asmara. So you had the two major powers. Usually you had to choose one side or the other. You can ask Lumumba and all of these others that perish. What His Majesty realizes that Ethiopia did not have the capital that it required to develop a modern system. They didn't have a lot of the infrastructure. In fact, shortly after his coronation, His Majesty reached out to the African American community to try to import skilled African Americans to form his labor base. That was squashed by the State Department that wouldn't grant passports. So His Majesty quickly realized, and remember, all the other African nations are colonized. And so as a head of state, I may want to, and this is where the idealism versus the practical things happen. The Pan-African will say, look how much white people him bring in the country. Look at the Jesuit priests where him have around the school. Look at this and that. But what happened is that when you're trying to build, you don't have the luxury of saying, say, I would have loved to do that. Payroll have to pay up on Friday. And I have to find a solution that's going to be the intermediate. It might not be perfect. So I might have to get Boeing pilots to fly Ethiopian Airline for the first couple of years. But I'm going to make sure in that agreement they're training Ethiopians, so that when a young Dejazmatch Kwasi is flying from Addis Ababa to Accra and the plane breaks down in Nigeria, I can send my Ethiopian engineers to fix the plane on the runway, and a young Rastafari brethren can see that is pure Ethiopians running this airline, when it maybe didn't start like that. But we have to start somewhere, and this is where it breaks down for a lot of Pan-Africanists, in that they want the ideal in terms of, and this is the breakdown between Haile Selassie and Marcus Garvey, not understanding the responsibility of running the head of state, and that this is real, you know what I mean? I have to get it done. So I'm going to have to use the British to displace the Italians. And people don't understand that the British tried to make Ethiopia a protectorate after that assistance, which is why His Majesty courted America to back off the British. America now starts to want to become the big dog in your country. So this is why I have to bring the USSR to back off America. I'm going to have to bring India to train the military because I don't want the Americans to be the ones running my military. So I'm going to get a smaller power. But the Indians, I don't want them to full up. So my generals, I might have to get the Belgians to come and train the officer class. So it's a constant balancing act of all of these powers, and you're playing them off each other, because even though there's unity there, they also tell on each other. So His Majesty is getting the information about this one from that one. He's balancing that one and that one. We know that these are intriguing in the country, but we also have to get things done. And so if we don't, then the whole thing collapses, and we find ourselves like many African nations, and we're not in an independent space to be able to provide an independent African nation in 1963 for the formation of or Organization of African Unity, and to bring unity between the Monrovia and the Casablanca groups. We can't do that if we're beholden to one power and they say we don't want that, which is what happened to many of those nations. But because we're playing each off, and the biblical Rastam will say, he shall have them in derision. You understand? And that is what we see when we examine how he played the big powers. Now, if I look outside as a Pan-Africanist, I say, look at US over there, and he's going to US, and look at this guy is a puppet, because none of them are saying anything bad about him, but they're looking at him from a strategic standpoint, in that he's my gateway into Africa. I'm not going to besmirch him in my media. I'm going to lift him up until, and this is the key that shows he's not a puppet. When His Majesty withdraws support of Israel after the Egypt invasion in 1973, America turns their back, England turns their back, the propaganda about the famine and all of these things come, which is what most of these Pan-Africanists are now grabbing on. Ironically, they're using the foreign colonialist claims to support some of their assertions about tyrant and these things. What did they say? He was feeding his lions steak while his people were starving. Do they overstand that when His Majesty was born, one of the worst famines ever took place in Ethiopia's history, the Kafukan, the evil days, where 1/3 of the population died, 90% of the cattle? Do they overstand that after His Majesty was no longer reigning visibly on the throne, that 1984 Michael Jackson and him friend them have to come with We Are the World for go sing song about famine? So you can't put the 1973-74 famine solely on His Majesty. And His Majesty brought the international, the BBC and these ones in to inform the world about the famine, and they used that as a propaganda piece to besmirch his reputation. Now, in terms of the stealing of money and things, you touch on stealing money, and these claims have been debunked. Edward Ollendorf has a book, The Two Zions. I'm the reading Ras, so you can get some source. I'll give you the source then. Where he went to the Swiss banks and was researching and found that no, there was no money squirreled away. And anybody who knows the royal family knows that they do not have big money like that. His Majesty left them with, modest means, but they do not live like the other royal families, because the majority of the money was invested back into the country. And I've reasoned with elder Ethiopians who say when they audited His Majesty, they can't believe what he did with the money that he had. And partly because as a wealthy businessman, he reinvested majority of his personal money to augment. This is why up to university education in Ethiopia was free. A lot of the elders who were part of the movement against him, now when they look at what Ethiopia has become, are sad. They say they didn't realize what they had during the reign of His Majesty, because Ethiopia has never regained that kind of world esteem and world standing as it did during the reign of His Majesty. So I think that people take one or two pieces. Now, let me be balanced, because you talk about bias.
Hold on.
Okay.
Before you hold the argument, I just want to ask one more thing. Relationship with Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yes.
Right? Can you speak on that historical? Because it seems like people in Eritrea, if I'm saying it properly, despise Ethiopians.
And that is manufactured because they are brothers and sisters from an ancient perspective. I've had a lot of run-ins. I want to big up my Eritrea family, and this is a sensitive topic, and they don't like Rastafari people, a lot of them, because of our, how we hold up the emperor. But what we have to understand is that Eritrea has always been where the foreign powers have put their stronghold. So the educational system, the orientation that they have received from foreign governments has always been anti-Ethiopian. The ancient kingdom of Aksum, for example, it was Eritrea was a part of that. Eritrea, they speak Tigrinian. They are part of that culture. The Orthodox Church unites them. They have about 50-50 Islamic foundation. In the Quran, you know, you look that the Prophet Muhammad sent the first Islam followers to the Christian king for refuge. So if we look from a cultural perspective, there should be no bad blood between Ethiopia and Eritrea from a cultural perspective. But what we find is that in 1890, when Eritrea was created by an Italian proclamation, that the word Eritrea was created by the Italians. You know, Asmara was established by Rasalula, which was an Ethiopian general who elevated it into a town from a village situation. But there's a lot of animosity toward Rasalula and the Tigrinians because of the vibe. The Italians, when they were in Eritrea, though, when we look at just the facts, the education system that was put in during the reign of His Majesty, we see that His Majesty really elevated the education system. The Italians never had more than a 4th grade education for Eritrea while they were there. However, the poison that they put into the Eritrean people, you know, lingers to this day. Now people will argue His Majesty, they had a federation, His Majesty dissolved the federation. To the Pan-Africanists, if you look from a Pan-African perspective, Eritrea and Ethiopia are better together. The coastline that Eritrea provides, the access to goods in the interior, and we have to ask, are either country better separated? And I think the answer is going to be no.
And clarify this for me. I hear there's a big, one of the sources of the animosity is that the Eritreans really helped with the military.
Yes.
And I guess they didn't get credit. And it seems like Ethiopia turned on them at a certain, if I'm getting the story correctly. Are you familiar with that one?
Not 100%, but what I can say is that I don't also want to minimize the historic animosity, because again, we have to remember these are separate kingdoms that are unified into a nation. And even in Tigray, they were separate kingdoms, which is what eventually split off. So the tribes on the coast, or the kingdoms on the coast, to the interior kingdoms of Tigray that was represented by Emperor Yohannes, who was the emperor at the time of the creation of Eritrea. So I don't want to minimize that there were animosities, and a lot of these flare-ups that you see are because of these ancient and historic animosities, and His Majesty inheriting this reality. It goes beyond His Majesty. His Majesty gets a lot of the blame for it. So for example, if the Italians are funding a uprising, they see that there might be some legitimate qualms that are happening between Eritrea and Ethiopia. But now a foreign power comes, because all of the opposition groups during the time of the Federation and these things, a lot of them, let me say a lot because you never want to use all, were funded by the Italians, or when you peel back, follow the money, you find out there were foreign interventions. So if I'm funding this group that has a legitimate grievance against the central government, and then let's say I put arms into the equation and I inspire them to uprise, and then the order is given to quell the uprising, and those generals that go out might have genuine animosity against Eritrea because human beings, the emperor now is going to get the blame, say him hate Eritrea. But when we look at the investments, Asmara was second only to Addis Ababa in terms of investment during the reign of His Majesty. When we look at the infrastructure that was being put in, the plans that were being put in, Eritrean students being brought into the educational system and elevated through education. When we look at all of that, it's not consistent with someone. If I hate you, I'm not going to educate you. You know, and this is what people don't understand. So there were rebellions in Gojam, for example. But people are not going to say that, you know, that Ras Haile used to run Gojam and him never liked His Majesty, and him father was Tekle Haile Manakata, and them never liked the Showens. And so these animosities, when we see these rebellions, and oftentimes they're funded by outside sources, as a head of state, I have to quell the rebellion. I have to send my military to quell these rebellions. And remember, these militaries might be a general whose ancestors also might have been an ancient king who never liked them people from morning. So, you know what I mean? When that kick up, I'm going to get the blame. You understand? So these are the things, and in terms of the bias and the criticisms, I don't have any criticisms of the emperor, but I balance because I understand the reality that he can't control the actions of all of his generals, of all of his people. So there's going to be legitimate things that happen, atrocities that took place, and I don't want to minimize that for my Eritrean brethren, my Oromo brothers, because I have brothers that me and them reach an overstanding. You know, one of my greatest moments was going to dinner with a group of Eritrean attorneys, and the vitriol they had against the emperor, I stand up. And by the end of it, you know what I mean? They had to concede some things because, you know, we were giving them the facts. And, you know, so and this is why I say the practice versus the theory. You know, if we stay in the theoretical realm, then there's no messiness. If we go into the practice, I tell people, run a PTA meeting, become a board member in an association, see the type of opposition that you have now, multiply that times a country, multiply that times separate kingdoms and see, and then judges the emperor by what he was able to achieve, and then you will see. Because I believe Haile Selassie, let me clarify. I know Haile Selassie is the Almighty but I don't have to give none of that to a person. I can just talk about the historical record. That glory is enough for because the achievements are superhuman when you compare it to any other world leader. I put His Majesty against any leader from beginning, Ramses, Thutmose, you bring every one of them. I will put them against Kadamawi Haile Selassie because when you see what he was able to achieve, and remember, he did not have the full support of the church either because he was modernizing. He didn't have the full support of Shoah because he's bringing in other people because your base wants you to stay tribal. He didn't have the support, so you can't win because you are the young visionary that sees something a certain way, but to implement it, you have to just do, and sometimes it's messy because it's not going to please everyone. And I would say this to all brethren and sistren, you can't please everyone being a leader, and this is the burden. An atheist, if you tell an atheist about the Almighty, what they'll say, he's a tyrant. Oh, him let the little baby die round there so. How did he let the elder die, Miss Parker, who never troubled nobody, die of cancer? The Almighty is a tyrant. But if you don't know the full plan and vision of the Most High, then you're going to have that. But if you know and have that faith, then you will understand that there's a plan, and that even in nature, if you look at a natural ecosystem, things die, things happen, but it's all for the greater balance and the greater good. And I think that because of the Eurocentric view that we have, we look at what the Creator is supposed to do or what the King of all kings is supposed to be as being very linear and binary and very superhero-ish. You never, there are no consequences for the actions. And that's just not how reality works. And this is the framework that we would like to place His Imperial Majesty. And then when you put him into that context and you see the discipline that he exercised as a human being, when you see that the results that he was able to achieve after the war with Italy, His Majesty had $5 million to run the entire country. 10 years after that, that had multiplied by orders of magnitude. So when you talk about fiscal responsibility in every sector of the Ethiopian span of life, it is unprecedented. It's not been fully documented. And I came into this faith as a skeptic. So that is how I balance my bias. I didn't grow up in the church. My father is a revolutionary Pan-Africanist in terms of, he look at, even up to now, he looks at my channel and say, what's all of this Bible? You know what I mean? My father, I love them thing there. You know what I mean? But I balance because His Majesty taught me to look at the Bible in a different light. And then I learned about the African Hebrew Israelite origin of the Bible through, looking at it from a different light, from an Ethiopic perspective. So when we balance all of the factors and see how His Majesty was able to maintain this delicate balance, we don't talk about the Organization of African Unity yet. We're just talking about internally in terms of what he was able to achieve with the military, the airline, the transportation system, the energy sector, the banks, telecommunicate, every facet. This is one emperor who is training, investing in the youth of Ethiopia, that these same youths are the ones, remember, that were turned against him to run all of these revolutionary Marxist things. They had that luxury because they were educated, had the best education. They would go to France, they would go to Belgium, they would go to USSR, they would go to the US, and they didn't spend a dollar from them pocket. This was all paid for. That to I sounds like love. That don't sound like a tyrant. To I don't know too much tyrants who are funding the education of the youth. And if we had leaders today that were doing the same thing, providing scholarships for African students so that they could create this unity. And I also want to touch on, some people want to say His Majesty was a bandwagonist when it come on to African liberation, and don't know that in the 20s, young Rastafari was helping to fund Marcus Garvey and the UNIA before there was a falling out with material resources, that the UNA members were actually migrating to Ethiopia to settle before the Italian invasion. And people like myself would argue that that's part of the reason why the beasts in the Vatican made war against Ethiopia, because they saw this influx of black people going in to rise up Africa in this revolutionary fashion. His Majesty was breaking down the barriers of tribalism, putting an end to slavery. In fact, because even though slavery was abolished in Ethiopia during the time of Menelik, it persisted because a lot of the races were getting a lot of revenue. His Majesty had to stamp out these things. He shall set the captives free. So when the elder Rastafari brethren said these things, we can point to chapter and verse and historical records to show how he did that. When we talk about he shall wipe away oppression, set the captives free, rule in all transgression and rule in equality, all of these things are reality. You know what I mean? So I would just caution those who are the detractors to take a deeper dive into the reign of His Majesty and to really put away the feelings and look, because many leaders have failed, and we see the subsequent leaders and their track record. By the way, Melez, all of these leaders are just implementing the development plan that was laid out by His Majesty. The Renaissance Dam, all of that was conceptualized. So there was no flaw in the development plan. That's called visionary. And you are often vilified if you are that visionary. And again, even among his own tribe or people, which His Majesty had Oromo blood, His Majesty had Showen blood, His Majesty had Garagi blood, Oromo. So he's all of these things. He's not just an Amhara emperor when we look at bloodline through his mother and his father. I write about these things in my book. So people have to, it's an emotional reaction and it's a propaganda reaction. It's sexy because we don't like monarchies anymore. But I would also caution people that in these democracies that you advocate for in theory, it's still families that end up controlling the thing. Monarchy is just a more honest way of looking at things, because you can see where the power is stemming from. But when you fool yourself that democracy, who is running America? Right now in America, the population, if it was a democracy, cannabis would be free throughout the United States of America if we are going by the population. It remains illegal on a federal level. Why? Because the interests that want it that way have stalled the will of the people. So this is not democracy in the purest sense. So we have to remove all of these illusions. Corporations and families run creation. His Majesty, being on the Solomonic throne, was just being very upfront that this is how we're doing it, but we're going to outline power to the people so that there is, the people can filter. But this is why we say it's a constitutional monarchy, or a moral theocracy, as we would say in Rastafari.
Please explain what a 360 deal is and why it should be avoided.
Okay. For this question, I have to go on both sides because I represent record labels and I represent artists. So I'm not cut and dry on 360 deals in terms of whether it's a negative, because I don't think it's negative in and of itself. But I do think that artists need to educate themselves as to what a 360 deal is, and can the record label or the person you sign in really provide the benefits that are necessary to make that make sense for your situation. So a 360 deal is where the record label wants to participate in all of your income streams. So it doesn't matter if it's touring, if it's your merchandise, if it's your publishing, they want to participate in all of it. The reality is that the average independent record label, or even a lot of the majors, don't have the infrastructure to really make that make sense. And so generally, from an artist perspective, I would advise them against signing a 360 deal. Now, what are the pros? They're basically saying that they want to partner with you to build your brand across all of these income streams. That's going to increase the revenue that you're able to generate, which would then make sense with them benefiting from some of that. So they're going to boost you up your touring. They're usually, if there's a 360 deal, they're going to help you with booking the tours. They're going to help you with tour support. They're going to help you with, a designer to design your merch. They're going to get you ad placement. They're basically taking over a management almost type role in your career. If you're working with a company like Walt Disney, for example, that actually has an ad agency, that actually has a news network, a film department, a television department, they literally can put you across all of these, and it makes sense. You had artists like Zendaya, certain people that were with Walt Disney Company that started off with these type of deals. It may make sense for you for that time because you're looking at the long term and what this can do in terms of building your brand, and I'm willing to just kind of seed that part of my career. There's something called a sunset clause that is also very important to overstand, meaning that after the termination of the term of the agreement, there would be some participation for a set amount of years. Maybe the second year they get 50%, the third year would be 25%, and it eventually seals up after a time. So that might make sense to sign a deal like that, because you're saying that they're going to invest to make me a global brand, and then I'm going to be able to eat for the rest of my life off of that work that was put in through that 360 partnership. And I can cap, where that is in my career, and just know that they're going to participate for whatever the term is. Now, the reality for most artists is you don't have the leverage to negotiate that type of deal. The reality for most artists is that the record label don't have the money to put you on tour support, don't have the money for doing all of these things, but they still want to participate. Yes, they may big up your brand, but how much is that ultimately worth? And can you do that on your own, where you're going to make considerably more money potentially if you get to where you're going as an independent artist? So you really have to dig down into the specifics of the deal. And in life, the mantra that as entertainment attorneys we say, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. So for artists who are considering the 360 deal, again, make sure you go to an entertainment attorney in your jurisdiction, sit down, invest. A lot of artists want to save the little money that it would take to sit down with an attorney and then end up signing deals that cost them thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. And this is why it's so crucial. Never sign any agreement because the words that look so innocuous, they can mean, words like perpetuity, words like, perpetual, these kind of words where, you just glance over them quickly. Options, people don't understand what an option is, so you might think you're signing a 3-year deal and there's 4 or 5 options, and you don't understand, how those work, how those can be exercised, so you have to sit with an attorney so you can be clear. But I don't want to come on here and tell people that 360 just absolutely makes no sense. Rare that it's going to make sense provided the tools that an independent artist has in the modern day to grow their brand and to do what they need to do. But I definitely would say be cautious, sit with an entertainment attorney, and understand, what are the income streams, and can this entity realistically help me to 10x or to multiply my value in these income streams that would justify me giving them a piece of the pie when I probably am doing all of the work for those additional streams while they're going to benefit.
All right, I heard you once say behind every hit song there's a lawsuit, right? Please share with artists listening what steps should be taken to better protect themselves from lawsuits from associate while creating music.
The saying is, with every hit, there's a writ. And, this is something that attorneys share. And big up Lloyd Stanberry, one of our preeminent entertainment attorneys in the reggae dancehall realm. He's the first one I actually heard say that, followed by legendary entertainment attorney Kendall Minter. These are some of the people that I've been blessed to really, learn from in terms of this business. Now, what that means is that when the song blows up and everything was handshake, you and your brethren, you and your team, everybody was nice and thing, and now your brethren, baby mother, see the tune I play every day, and you're supposed to make at least $1 million off of that. You not get no pay. But I know you that I say, in the background there, and there's no paperwork, or, you did give me one line, say this and you said that. And now everyone wants to get paid. They go sit with an attorney, and the attorney say, you put in a line and this and this happens. So that from that perspective, what usually happens is that a demand letter goes out. Your attorney or you are going to get this demand letter saying that we are deserving of this. You're going to say, what you talk about, brethren? That no make no sense. And then there's litigation that ensues. Let's look at Shensia, her big song that she had there with Meg Thee Stallion. She, famously came out and said, they cleared all the samples and the song get big, and then we see lawsuit drop a ground when the song was there, and come to find out that the company that was hired by the record label didn't really go through the full process of clearing the sample, and then there's a lawsuit. So that's another way, aside from your brethren, your producer who made the song, or the composer who created the song may have used a sample and you don't know that there was a little sample in there. And it's very advanced in the music industry right now in terms of sample clearance. There was one time, sometime you could get away with it for a little bit, but right now everybody, publishers are on the lookout. Songs are encoded with metadata that allows them to track where songs are being used from a sample. So again, behind every hit there's a writ. To answer your question now, how can we mitigate these things? The split sheet is your best friend. Making sure that anybody who's in your session is on paper. So I know a lot of artists, particularly in reggae and dancehall, we like to have a vibe, whole heap of people in the studio. And then when you look on Mariah Carey, or you look on some of these big artists and you see only a couple people in the studio, and you say, oh, them catch a vibe, but guess what happened? They want to make sure, you understand? This very controlled environment, because this is a place of business. This is your workspace. So they want to make sure who's in the studio. Even the engineer have to sign off paperwork. Everybody who is, a part of these big songs, when you get to that level, there's a reason why it's so controlled, because they're trying to avoid the back end. The thing, when we're informal in the beginning, and I'm an artist, so I understand the creative process. Sometimes you catch a vibe in there, you have a spliff, you have a little Guinness, you have Hennessy, a flow, and everybody a whole a joy, and a hit song come out of it. What you have to do is the following day, before the song goes out on the road, is just follow up. Get your attorney, get your management, whoever, get those people to sign the paperwork so that you can mitigate. And even with that, we have to be clear that anybody can file a lawsuit. Because you file a lawsuit doesn't mean that it has merit, or so you might not even be able to avoid a frivolous lawsuit, but you want to make sure that when you take it to court, it can get dismissed on a summary judgment because you have put all your things in place. And being a successful artist, a successful content creator, a successful in business, litigation is part of your expenses, because once you have deep pockets, this is part of the business. That's why every multi-million-dollar company has a in-house counsel that is there to deal with these things. That's just a part of doing business in a litigious society. So to some extent, you can't avoid being a target if it's a hit song. But again, having your paperwork in order, making sure that sample clearances, that the songs are not being leaked or being put out before the samples have been cleared. That's a huge one right now, because that's where a lot of the litigation is happening. And let's also be clear, most of these cases never see a courtroom. They're settled out of court, but big checks are being cut. There was a story that came out recently about Puff Daddy having to pay, I think, Sting something like $4,000 a day for every step you take, or don't quote me, but it was, in the thousands of dollars per day it came up to in terms of the settlement. Because a lot of times when they come on the back end, your leverage is then gone to negotiate what they would have asked you on the front end. So a lot of time they're coming to take 100% of publishing. Because another thing I want to be very clear, intellectual property, trademark, copyright litigation is very expensive. This is why most of them settle, because you have to have expert witnesses that you have to pay. A lot of time you got to get data from surveys, because the standard is a likelihood of confusion. So we're talking about the tens of thousands. We're talking about sometimes years in the litigation process. So it's not a cheap endeavor, which is why most of these settle out of court. Because if you go to court, your attorney's fees, your expert witness fees are going to be astronomical. So when you're dealing with this industry, it's better to take the pain on the front end, take the time to clear the samples, to sit with an entertainment attorney to pay. So even if you can't avoid it, you mitigate what that back end is going to be, because it can be painful. Now, having said that, we are coming from a hustling culture. I want to just cowboy culture. I want to give the other side of it, because sometimes it may be worth you to just go out there, take the song just to get the exposure, knowing that I'm going to end up giving away all of that song. But now I'm a global entity. People know my name. I can now, and that does happen as well. So I don't want to act, and sometimes that's the calculus. The song is just such a hit. The label puts it out knowing that, listen, this is going to blow. And then from the popularity, I'm going to be able to leverage. And then remember, also from the touring and all this other revenue, you're going to also be eating. So artists and their teams may choose that, but it's an expensive calculation, very expensive.
Do you believe reggae music is still profitable for producers, not artists, because I know artists could tour, but for reggae producers, do you think reggae music is still profitable? Not deep old catalogs,
yes.
Modern day made music.
I think for the producers that are business people, it's profitable, because there are multiple ways to monetize. For the vast majority, no, it's not profitable. And this is why it's so critical for you to be a student. If you're in reggae music right now, you have to become a student. And let's be clear, for those who are not familiar, when we talk about producer, generally in the reggae industry, we're talking about a composer who's actually building the beat. So there's a publishing interest. A producer doesn't necessarily have to be a beat maker. We want to distinguish those two.
Financer.
Yeah, a producer can be a financer, that's an executive producer. A producer can be someone who's putting the pieces together, working with an executive producer who hires producers. So there are different configurations. A producer usually gets a percentage of points. That was how the industry was set up. So you would get up to a 3% percentage of the song that you would get to eat a royalty off of the master recording. That was how producers generally were paid, because they weren't necessarily the composer of the song. They were the person that was putting together. Good example of an executive producer would be a Puff Daddy working with Hit Squad, or, which is a group, a production company that is actually making the beats. But Puff Daddy is saying, I want to use this, I want to use that, or he's he's curating the final song experience. So in reggae music, I want to be clear, a lot of time when we're talking about producers, we're talking about the man that build the rhythm, and that means that you're also a composer, meaning that you also have a share of publishing royalties that you can eat from. So the producers who are business savvy, they are leveraging their catalogs, they're getting sync rights, they're putting their music in video game, they're doing things that cause their releases to be profitable. The producers that are just building a rhythm, putting it on a distro kid, TuneCore, putting up a track a week, when them look at the revenue, is a love thing. You know what I mean? It's not, and I know because I represent producers, and this is something that I'm very passionate about in terms of reggae music, because the vast majority of our industry is not profitable. Most of our industry is working on a volunteer for the love basis. You know what I mean? There's no industry that have more love than reggae music. That's from the promoters who are not making money right now. That's from the artists. We give thanks for the sound system culture, which is the backbone of our industry. Dub plate money is how most of our artists survive in this business. But the producers don't eat from that. And I think we're going to have to modernize that whole dub plate industry. That's another thing I'm passionate about, to standardize so that we can release some of these classic anthem dubs, just like Puff Daddy. If you look at what DJ Khaled is doing, he took dub plate culture, Puff Daddy took dub plate culture, and they made a multi-billion-dollar business. What they do? Take old rhythm, voice new artists on the old rhythm, they shout out the producer upon the new rhythm, and they put it on the road. That's a dub plate. We've been doing that, but guess what? They're licensing that old rhythm. They're licensing the lyrics so that they can put it on an album and put it to the world. In reggae, we have not done that.
Why do you think reggae is unique compared to other genres in regards to that? Love comes before the business.
Because reggae is a way of life. Reggae is in our DNA. Reggae is the African drum being made manifest and is a heartbeat, So we are unique, and then the other thing is that reggae was born out of struggle and to some extent trauma. The traumatized inner city, the wailing, ones. So reggae, we wear it on our sleeve. We're very emotional with it. We make decisions emotionally in the reggae industry, and we don't really, it was a hustling too. We also had a long period of reggae where we were using it to launder money from other aspects. So we didn't really have to look at the business model seriously. So the golden era of reggae, we had a lot of ganja money, a lot of cocaine revenue, illicit dollars that were being pumped into reggae shows. People can talk to you about that history. And that's not unique to reggae. If we look at R&B, you see the mafia involvement. The music industry in general has always had an underworld component in terms to how, and it's not talked about enough, but the problem with us is we never transitioned because we didn't have that major label system that came in to supersede the mafia money. So when that drug money dried up, we've not recovered even up to now from that slump. So we used to pay the artists 40 grand and things, and the artists are still charging these things when the pulling power that they have to fill a venue is not commensurate with that. We're still marketing our dances like it's 1970. We build a flyer and we drop it off at the Coco and the party shop, and them think that we're still on that vibe. We haven't, I watch Live Nation come in and take over the reggae industry. I was working with promoters at the time. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. So, what they used to do, they would hire the reggae promoters to fill the venue, taking your email list slowly but surely, because when the people are buying the tickets, they're collecting the information. They were building their own marketing apparatus until they were giving the promoters less and less until they just cut them out. They were marketing their own shows. I saw that transition happen in real time. So we have not, and most of the promoters have not been aggressive in terms of building an email, building an online community, building that tribe to ensure that they have that direct-to-consumer relationship that would ensure that their brands stay viable. And I think the brands that are still surviving are the brands that did do that do have that that cultish kind of following that allows them to put out their flyer and people invest before the lineup is even announced in some cases. But those who are just take your mortgage money and me love them artists. You ever hear Highway new song, it bad
I go put it, you know what I mean? And you build a show, but you don't have no kind of demographic analysis, and you don't know nothing about marketing. You know what I mean? You and your brethren, them a do a thing, and Caribbean Social Club open, and you have a brethren over there. So, and we survive like that for a time, but that luxury, you know, we can't even get visas now because of the infrastructure now. You know, you have to be at these quote unquote reputable venues, which are now being controlled by the Live Nation, by the Boweries, by the big wigs in the different markets. So for us, it's hard to, as our local promoters, our diaspora promoters have been locked out for the most part of the touring market content of our music. We were the rebel music, you know, we were dangerous, you know, and that has a draw in and of itself. You would fill a stadium, you know, Bob Marley when he was, yes, now it's kind of mainstream, but remember when Bob Marley was there filling stadiums, he was counterculture. It was revolutionary, so people wanted to see, who is this man talking them thing here with this big Ethiopian emperor side of him, and you know, this is unprecedented. I find now our artists, what I say is a lot of them want to stay in the gray area. So I don't offend nobody, I'm just trying to please everybody. The hippieization of reggae music. So by trying to please everybody, you please nobody, because I can get the alternatives. And who has done that excellently is the Cali Roots movement. They make that palatable reggae for everybody, but guess what they have on our people? They're in a white packaging. So it's very friendly to the consumer base that's willing to, that's been trained to spend. Our demographic doesn't spend, you know what I mean? But we will spend if it's something that is a spectacle. So someone, when we look at the rise of Sizzla Kalonji, when we look at the rise of Anthony B. Capleton, these people were pulling out, you know, during that period, Garnet said, they were pulling out crowds. When we look at the beginning of the reggae revival, they were starting to pull out crowds because they were, but when the things start go down now into the gray area and you're trying, and I understand both sides, I want to be clear. You want to keep your band going. You don't want to be offensive because you want to keep the bookings and the fight of certain communities and these things and these practical, but this is where faith, courage, and determination comes in. Where you lose a market, you can gain another market because you hold true and you have that, again, that cutting edge. By trying to please everyone, sometimes you please no one. Everybody has their own team, and every team has its various advisors that are going to give you the conventional wisdom. Rastafari, let me talk about Rastafari, doesn't fit into conventional wisdom. It shouldn't work in a mainstream society that is geared toward hedonism and the pleasure principle. Rastafari, that's preaching self-discipline, black liberation, fundamental freedom, repatriation. These things are, by conventional wisdom, they're very niche. But what we see again, Robert Nesta Marley, by really leaning into his niche, he now becomes something that everybody wants to see because it's different. And that's what they have to understand. Faith in Rastafari will bring you that global success. It's not an easy road, it's a harder road. Look at Burning Spear, these artists. What are the songs in their catalog that people want to hear? It's these revolutionary songs from that time. Even love, black love right now is revolutionary. So even if you just want to stay upon the black love side and the black family side, that's still revolutionary. So don't think I mean it to say, you know, it has to be something, you know, look at, one of my favorite songs is Chronic's Majesty. And that visual, the visual and the song to I, you know, that is super revolutionary to I, you know what I mean? So by staying on that page and delivering, and then the other part that they had that was really magnifying was the unity. And I know all of these brethren, you know, I want to make it clear, I know all of them. And I would encourage them, if I see them and I could sit with them, the same reasoning, I would encourage them to return to the basis of Rastafari. And we look, you see Kabaka had the song, The Calling, they returned to that and it worked. You know, so I think that for all of the younger artists, because there are artists now behind them that are coming. And this is the thing, you know, my brethren Dottie Bookman coined a term, the reggae revival. But there's always been uprising. There's always been waves. I talked about the Sizzler, Garnet Silk, Capleton, Anthony B. Luciano. That was my wave when I was a youth coming up, when I was putting on my covenant. You know what I mean? So that was the same phenomenon that was happening when the reggae revival. Before that, there was another, you had Sugar Minott, you had other, so there's always been these successive waves coming out of Jamaica, and there will be another one that comes, because that is just Jamaica's blessing. When one stop doing what they're supposed to do, His Majesty will rise up another. So it shows you it's not the artist, it's the message itself that looks for a vehicle to take that message globally. And whoever holds on and hugs on to that message gets the blessing of global renown. And this is one way we know, and we don't have to be convinced about the power, the divine power of His Imperial Majesty. Because those who glorify Him in truth and in rights, they never see them begging for bread. They're on tour all of the time. They're doing what they have to do, because there will always be someone thirsting for that message. It so happens right now that a lot of that thirst is coming from the African continent. How many are trying to tap into that wellspring of potential? If you're just doing it to follow convention or please the mainstream, you're just going to focus on Europe and America. But if you had that revolutionary spirit and you are willing to invest, because touring Africa may mean you need to invest some of your own resources to make it work. But long term, this is where Rastafari artists should be moving. And that's because, again, what is our niche? Is that revolutionary, speaking truth to power, uncomfortable conversations, the things that Africans couldn't say in their own country, that were coming out of the island of Jamaica. That is what made us powerful to Africans, and that is why wherever you go in Africa, Jamaicans have that esteem, is through the music, and largely through Rastafari music. So if we're not playing that role in the ecosystem anymore, we're going to lose market share naturally, because if it's not that, if I'm going to just want party, then I'll listen to Afrobeat, because Afrobeat have that happy kind of vibe and it's going to make me party. And the Rastam are not making party music. The dancehall is no longer making good party music. They're making trap dancehall, they're trapped in the lower chakra vibration, low frequency vibration. Trauma music, I call it. So if I'm not going to fulfill that role in the ecosystem, I'm going to lose. And this is why, again, I would implore all of my brethren, young artists, to just hold fast. It's a longer road, it's a harder road, and we can't sugarcoat that. But in the long run, your legacy, your catalog is going to be more valuable by sticking to the blueprint or the black print that was laid by our elders. Look at Culture, a man that could have toured for his whole life on the continent, full up stadiums. He was singing Rastafari music. Who are the artists right now singing about repatriation, if we're looking at the young generation? When's the last time you heard a repatriation song that piqued your ears? Look at what young Sizzla Kalonji, 96 to 2000, which I would argue is one of the greatest, if not the greatest songwriter that Jamaica has ever produced. I still feed on 96 to 2000 Kalonji.
But Sizzla still performing 96 to 2000 Kalonji.
Those songs can never go anywhere, you understand? But if we correlate with the young artists, who's giving us, I first heard about Melchizedek through Sizzla Kalonji. So, and this is why you see I start the Lion Voice Network, because we can't sit down. I had the blessing of being grounded by Rastafari elders, Bongo Watto from Augustown, Bongo Shefan, Ras Iris, Bongo Ras Marcos, Ras Pido, Mama Baby. I can call elders all day that I was able to sit at their feet and to listen and to be grounded. I was able to go chant Nyabingi. My daughter was sanctified at Scott Pass Nyabingi Center by elders that are no longer here. So I was able to, my grounding in Rastafari is going to be different than a brethren who listen to some songs and say, you know what, this is a nice liberty, and read some books and thing, you know what I mean? So we're not having that exchange of knowledge. And what I realize is that my generation, I come from a generation we don't turn on camera. And Nyabingi, I had to train myself You know, and even people accost me now, why are you always on camera? I had to train myself to say, you know what, we have to put things on camera because the young people are not going to ends out with no elders right now. You know what I mean? You have to go on the mediums where they are so that they can get the teaching. Even though I say I know all of these artists, there are very few that I've been able to sit down and really ground with and reason. So they may just see me and say, yes, Raz, but they haven't been able to pick my mind or know about the history of Ethiopia. This is why I wrote a book, and this is why I'm writing the history of His Majesty, because most of them might not have the time or might not know the source material to inspire them. Because as you said, these elders were planting the seeds in these artists. Bob Marley used to go on Nyabingi down a back wall. You know, our elders told us they used to see a young Bob as a ballad come and he would be there, you know. So he was singing when he's talking about Jump Nyabingi. And these are lived experiences that he's able to talk, and you feel it in the music. It's a livity. If I'm just on the internet and the computer, that's also going to come out in my music. So we have to be able to feed, and I'm part of Generation X. You know, I was born when the 2 sevens clash. You know what I mean? So I think it's so important for our generation, because we're the bridge generation. We're the last generation that got to sit with the elders at their feet. Most of them no longer exist. So I think we have a responsibility, and that's why I'm not so hard. A lot of people, you know, they think I'm soft on these younger artists, but I defend them because I also, the same thing like, you know, I don't ease up the fire either, but I also have to be balanced in my assessment because I also overstand. They did not, you know, most of them never been to a real bingy, sleep on a piece of board, feel strong, you know, eat roast breadfruit and them thing there, and, you know, which I go through them experiences. One of the things that I am confident and why I don't have to really be, I can be balanced in my assessment, is because life is going to beat up anybody who, when you take on Rastafari, even if you think it's a joke, and this is why so much people you see with locks and then them trim and them gone, because it's not an easy way of life, even if you think, and a lot of them are in that season of life where they're being tested. Do I really stand for this? And some of them may not make it. Ultimately, we don't know what history has to unfold. I've seen many chairmen, when you see them, I mean, look at soldiers of Jah Army, who I come up with at the Nyabingi house with these brethren, go at them yard, and they just change to soldiers. Because why? The Jah was rough. You know what I mean? When you step in at this shoe, if you're not really defending it and you really have to inquire about it, you know what I mean? You're going to have to make a decision. So all of these artists will be tested, and, you know, do unto others as you would want done unto the eye. So I want to be there as a big brother to, you know, when they're ready, we're here doing the work. You know what I mean? So they have somewhere to plug in, because I wish I had that as a young Ras, that I had more institutions or things that I could have plugged into. And that, I think, is our job, you know, as youthful ones, but as ones who, again, are that bridge, who got to see the last of that kind of golden era where the elders them were there and fit and strong, and we were able to see them administrate in the ISIS. And this is across all of the mansions of Rastafari, whether it be 12 Tribe, Nyabingi, Bobo Shanti, we're all in the same predicament. I'm a Nyabingi man, administrate, trained in the Nyabingi, the Kete, Funde, the bass. You know, I can play all of these. I was trained by our elders. You know, going to Jamaica, traveling to Jamaica to different Bingi campsites, spending the time in a tent, doing all of these things, and taking the time to learn the livity from that original perspective, you know, grounding with one's like a Ras knife, you know what I mean, and going through them campus and different things. I was able to do that, but a lot of these youths, again, have not. But we want to be here. We don't want to be elitists and just burn a fire upon them and then we're not there, because they're human beings. A lot of them, when they started, had no children. They're at the age now, they're all starting to have children, and life is real, you know. So we have to make allotment for that. And this is where, again, I come into theory versus practice. A lot of the people burning them, if you put those people in the same position, them do the same or worse. And I've seen that too. You know how much crocus bag man I know right now, when you check them, they're in a gold chain and gold teeth and whole thing, you would have never known, said they were barefoot, ayabongo man. But it was just for a time. They used to burn up everything. You know what I mean? So you cannot be too, you have to, I find in this chart being balanced is the best way to move forward because and that's the life that Haile Selassie lived, and this is why he was cussed, because you can't please everyone. And sometime if you're a bridge builder, you're gonna have people from that side hate you, you're gonna have people from that side hate you, but the balanced people, the hope is that there will be a bridge for them to walk over so we can actually get things accomplished. And that should be the ultimate aim. And that is what I have done in my chart, establishing the Association of Rastafari Creatives as a trade association. So an institution is there and most of these artists know about it, and they're kind of watching to see what's going to happen with it. But we continue to grow, we continue to prosper. So when they're ready to do the actual work for build institutions within Rastafari, they don't have to come start from scratch. There's a bridge that's there. You have Rastafari TV, you have other platforms that are there, same way, that we work with and we collaborate with to build this infrastructure so that when the Rastafari movement and the youths them are ready to step up and do some work, there will be infrastructure there for them to inherit.
Please share what you believe are the keys to male leadership in the modern household.
First and foremost, the most revolutionary act a black man can do right now is to lead a black family. And when you're vetting your circle, I like to work with family man, because it shows me that you have a history of being able to accomplish something of a magnitude. You're reliable, because to maintain a family, you have to have certain things that are reliable. So the thing I've been preaching on my channel is that you have to, first and foremost, have a connection with the Almighty. Whatever that is, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Buddhist, you have to be centered from a higher power. Why? You have to be accountable to something higher than yourself, because yourself will always let yourself down if you're just there, because we're human, we're the flesh. So we have to have an anchor that's higher than ourselves. Second, when you seek the Almighty and all the Almighty's righteousness, then you have to identify what is your purpose. What is it that you can do to use your unique skill or talent in service of that higher power to make the world a better place? Why is that important? Because as a man leading a family, you are called to lead. If you do not have a clear compass of what you're trying to do for yourself in service to your Creator, how can you lead somebody else? How can you ask a young lady to follow you blindly when you even yourself don't know what you're doing and where you're going? That's a recipe for disaster. And this is what has happened to many of our brethren. Because this girl, as the prophet said, had a big butt and a smile, you go follow this woman and you create life. You know what I mean? But you had no plan other than the big butt and the smile made you feel happy within that moment. Now we have these families with no direction. It's chaos. There's no lion guarding the pride. We have an epidemic of child molestation, trauma at record highs because there's no defense. So as a brethren, you have to understand that if you're serious about black liberation, the biggest contribution that you can have is to maintain, protect, provide for a black family. And to do that, you have to be crystal clear. I tell young brethren, spend your 20s identifying that purpose, fulfilling that purpose. The next thing is that you have to identify what is the economics of my purpose. This is the key. Because in the Pan-African movement, we've made poverty a badge of honor. The more poor you are is the more righteous you are, because I don't get money and think. I've had people say, look at the Ras, I do YouTube and I talk about, And I'm saying, so brethren, His Majesty was a businessman. Rastafari was never conceived as a poverty trad. So, these are the false concepts. And that is something that I am very clear in my ecosystem model that I advocate for. Failure is a part of the process. We have to train ourselves. In His Majesty, I I've been doing a series on leadership, and I go to the University College of Addis Ababa speech. His Majesty gives a treatise on leadership, page 12 of the selected speeches. I'm the reading Ras, so I'm going to give them the citation. The leadership, you know, it says a leader must train himself out of a fear of failure, because that's part of the process. Does a baby come out the womb and start run up and down? The baby have to crawl, the baby fall down, the baby, you know, before it can walk. So anything we do, failure, we got to allocate a time for failure. And this is why, again, practice and theory, that's the theme of this interview. The theoretical people have the most chat, because on the sideline, everything works. You know what I mean? Once you're just criticizing what a man is doing. Everything sounds good, and when you try to implement and you reach that roadblock and you have to do this and do that, I put on events, and a lot of time people will criticize. They don't know what you had to go through to get that done. Why are you working with this person? Because this person was going to do what I said that needed to be done, and this person, you might like them, but they're not coming through. So it's either I'm not going to do the event or I'm going to do it with someone who can fulfill the obligation. So as a man, you know what I mean? You have to have that integrity to be able to lead. And again, this comes down to your purpose, having that anchor so that you can draw from, because mental health is serious. And the burden of leading a family for a black male right now is unprecedented, because oftentimes you can't unload on your woman. You know, a man, that's not the woman's purpose. And I'm not saying you can't consult, but you can't dump on them. So you have to find other outlets, whether it's prayer, exercise, a therapist. But as a man, you have to really manage your mental health, and you have to, and part of that is, again, having that connection to the higher power and being very clear in terms of what it is you are doing to serve that creator by utilizing your innate passion. That means, what would you be doing even if you weren't being paid? Now, how can I monetize? How can I find the economics? Establishing an economic base before you bring the woman into the picture is critical, and this is where we fail, because instant gratification. Your light is going to draw women to you. That doesn't mean you have to sleep with them and bring life into the world. We have a thing called discipline. You know, dick discipline. I don't know how graphic we can go, but you know what I mean? Dick discipline, which is critical, because who you procreate with will shift the entire reality of your world if you choose the wrong person. I'm very big advocate on vetting your people that you allow into your intimate space thoroughly. So the one night stand in I&I world don't exist, because you can't get enough information on a person in a one night scenario. I go to the dance and me and a sister rent a tile, and the two of we are bubble, and our vibes are going and whisper in our ears, and you know, stop it right there, brethren. Don't bother with it, because guess what happened? That chemistry might only be for that night. That sister may have a completely different worldview, but when you deposit that seed of life in that sister that night there, because you couldn't find a condom and the vibes is still higher, you know what I mean? And a life is created. Now guess what? You have something that can't work. Sister gone deso, you gone deso, sister and baby, father from another family, his brother, uncle so and so is with your youth now. Things go on and you traumatized. Confusion. You understand? The lion is not there, the male lion is not there for govern his pride land, his territory. You know what I mean? And this is how we have to think about it. So everything is about legacy, preservation of seed. And let me just elaborate more. Right now is Armageddon time. So we saw what happened in the pandemic. If you had chosen wrongly in that pandemic, judgment, because you were locked down with someone. And it's crucial, because again, this is the revolution. Your family is the first government. You are the king, and your house is the palace. So if your government internally is not good, you know, the trauma response is flight or fight. Fight or flight. So when we try to build institutions and everybody walk away from the table, that's a trauma response. When we get to a bump in the road, and it's because of people's home upbringing, they avoid that conflict instead of working through it, which is a natural part of any organization building. So this is why we have so few black institutions, because we operate from that trauma response, or we fight. You look at a lot of black institutions, the infighting. Other races, it's not that they love each other to the highest extent, but it's that they understand the bigger picture. They're able to work through conflict, through a system, and get the ultimate objective done. And this is coming from what? Broken family structure. So we can't even build this Edenic alternative to Babylon, this Zion on earth that Rastafari achieved. This is why so much of my content become family content, because I realize we can talk about the history all day. We can talk about what we want to do all day. If we don't have stable people to execute this or to live in this new reality, the same Babylon corruption is going to manifest once again, because Babylon comes out of that corruption. It comes out of that dysfunction of the family structure. It comes out of that hurt, of that abuse. These are all of the things that we hate about Babylon. Is a response to a way of life, and we have to restore that original way of life, which is why Haile Selassie, being crowned with his empress at the same time, is so revolutionary. His empress was pregnant at the time, so when you see that coronation picture, man, woman, and child, you know, the children surrounding the throne as well for added effect. That trinity is what we have to advocate for, and we have to preserve with our lives. So this is what I want to kind of redefine, because we had people like Robert Nesta Marley, the great, but you know, the levity that he had was a lot of women. And then we had the great King Solomon, levity he had. And these are two examples that a lot of brethren use to justify having a lot of baby mothers or a lot of women around. Number one, and big up to Dr. Aini Naya Bingi Elder, polygamy is a rich man lifestyle. So if you can be in that small 1% of the 1% that can afford to manage all of these households, don't bother with it. And there's a methodology and a culture that comes with polygamy. It's not this baby mother don't know about that baby mother there. And you know, oftentimes the wife is the one that's choosing the other wives and things. So there's a culture around that, so we can't use that. Secondly, His Majesty example with Empress Menen was a monogamous relationship. One man, one woman, the children all under one roof. This is the standard that we are really trying to identify for Rastafari, brethren and sistren. And the generations that came before us did not have that standard. And I've seen, you know, because I've had to deal with, you know, fundraising for multiple elders that pass away and their children are not involved because they weren't in their children's life to that full extent. And, you know, the community ends up having to bear the burden and these things that happen from that spreading of the seed widely, which sounded good in theory. But in practice, again, that trauma is dispersed because there's resentment from the children who didn't grow up with a father in the household. Yes, you might have gone to see them. Yes, you might have bought them a Air Jordan for their 8th birthday, and you remember that fondly, how them did smile. But that one Jordans where you buy them can't make up for all of the time that you were not present. And a lot of us in the Caribbean, that's our mentality. We buy them some nice things and we're there for them sometime, but that doesn't take away a child's hurt from not being there with a father in the home. So we want to, my generation in particular, the brethren I see prospering right now are the brethren that have their queen and their families under one roof, and that their queens are helping them to build. I live that way, and I want to encourage my brethren them to adopt this as the Rastafari standard moving forward, because to build a strong nation, we have to start with strong communities. To build a strong community, it starts with strong black families.
All right, what should be the criteria men should use when choosing his wife and mother of his children?
Okay, this is a critical one, something I've talked about on my platform. One of the things that you have to understand when you're with potential wife is that this is going to be the mother of your children. So there are certain basic characteristics, and what I advocate for during the vetting process just in general is that, and this is why purpose is so critical. When you know your purpose and you're on your way, your queen should fit into that purpose in terms of she should be an asset to whatever that purpose is. She should be just as passionate about the purpose. So in pursuing your purpose, you're naturally going to be interacting with people, as you network, as you implement whatever that purpose is. Those women that are attracted to the light, you know, they're going to show themselves worthy and have some function within that purpose. So that functionality, how you work with them, how you vibe with them, non-sexually, is going to be the first phase of the vetting process. Do they have things like initiative? You know, because you need a woman with initiative that is going to not just be doing what you tell her, but she comes to the table. My wife challenges me constantly. Sometimes I don't even like it, to be honest. But she's going to bring a new piece of content and say, you see this, what they're doing there? Because based on, I have to be careful what I communicate to my wife, because she's going to hold me accountable for it. You understand? And husbands know what I'm talking about. You can't just run your mouth, you know what I mean, about no idea, because she going to come find the information, and now I'm, you know, on the hook for following through with what we talk about. So you want a woman that has that ability, so she's not just static in a robot to what you're doing, but she's going to say, did you try to do it this way? You know, this a person is doing it this. Did you ever think about implementing that initiative? Is key, because you want someone who's going to take that initiative with your children. Try new things. Ballet don't work. Kung Fu, or, you know, she's going to constantly be thinking how to enrich your children. You need someone with creativity, because, and again, you're vetting this person while you're working on your purpose. Is she showing creativity? Because that creativity is going to be needed when you face a challenge or obstacle. Can she deal with it creatively, or does she get stuck and shut down upon you and everything crash? You know what I mean? And I advocate being with a person for all of the seasons of their life before you lock them in. So you can see how they act when they're upset. You see how they deal with, you know, challenges. You see when they're happy, because sometimes we just see a person when they're happy and we lock them in, and then something happen and this person change. But I didn't do my due diligence, because when she was happy, you know, I watch the curves, you know, on the bottom, they look right. So me just go in for a night. You understand? So these are the things that we have to discipline ourselves so that we can vet. But it all goes down to having clarity on what your vision is. If I bring someone into my life that is not in alignment with my vision, the majority of the time we're going to butt heads, and it's going to separate, because she's growing in one way, I'm growing in another way. That doesn't mean that your wife necessarily has to be involved in your direct business, but she has to be at a minimum supportive and invested in your success. You know, I've seen people try to do the two different things thing, and most of the time it doesn't work. Your wife has to be vested, and this is where the kingship, different from the partnership, because the modern relationship is a partnership, is a 50-50. I'm going to do my career goals, you're doing your career goals. The ancient traditional system, the man is leading the vision, and your wife, whatever she's doing, is going to help to propel you to that. That doesn't mean eventually she might not have her own businesses, but usually they feed into the overall family empire or family kingdom. And that is really what you want. And as we said off camera, when you pick the right person, the blessings never stop. This thing is like a reinventing. You know, my wife and I have been married 16 years. We've been together over 20, and we're in the golden age. It keeps getting better. You hit a point. You go through the rough part, you know, because there were parts that were rough. Don't let me try sugarcoat the thing.
Rough patches.
You know what I mean? But when you get through that rough part, and then you're both on the same page, the heights that you reach with that person, the telepathy. My wife and I are telepathic, you know. A certain thing I will meditate and she will just bring it forward. You understand? It can be small little things, but these are things that you build over time. And you cannot build that with a casual relationship with these things, you know. The love making. Let me just go to the love making for a second. You think that little woman where you see one time stand can excel past someone who known you from years and know everything and into your soul. You can't compare, my brethren. You know what I mean? So, and I think one of the things that we have not done as husbands and fathers is that our marketing for the institution of marriage has been shabby. The single people marketing is strong, you know. Because every podcast you hear the gals them a talk about this and that. So you feel like that is the best thing. Them not tell you about them sleep with this woman and them wake up and money missing from them wallet, or the girl thump them in them mouth because she feel like them. You know what I mean? All of the things that they have to go through, they're not highlighting that part there. When we as married man and we sleep good, once we do, the sleep we get is unprecedented because we're secure in our relationship and we're with someone who literally has our best interests and our children's best interests at heart at all times. So we have to do a better PR job as husbands to highlight the benefit, because a lot of youths don't even aspire to marriage anymore because they look at it as something negative. And again, the discord in popular culture is one against the institution of marriage, is one against being with someone long term, is that women are the opposition, but it's how you vet and select. Nothing can beat a queen, and that's why every kingdom there's a queen. That's why every wealthy family is a man and a woman at the head of the family that's running it. When you look across the board, across cultures, across creed, you're going to see the same things there in terms of family structure. I was blessed in that I went through the gala stage and I came out of the gala stage into Rastafari. So a lot of people come into Rastafari, and because of Rastafari and the glory of His Majesty, they start attracting women, and they go through their gala stage because they didn't get women as much before than when they Rast. I was the opposite. I was running from that lifestyle because I had reached a level of the gallus ship and realized it was empty. I went to Howard University, I have to be honest, and we were putting up numbers there in terms of that lifestyle, but we realized it was empty. So I actually went through a period where I fasted from intimacy, years. I lived like a monk, you know what I mean? Just studying Rastafari was very extreme. And I'm not saying that can work for every virgin, but I had to learn how to be in a non-sexual relationship with a woman. And that was one of the best things I did because it allowed me to see clearly. When I was in law school, women were throwing themselves at man. I'm not gonna exaggerate. I went to Howard Law. You go and look at the class of Howard Law and look at the caliber of women there, you know? You look around, because in America in particular, once you reach into grad school, that's when the woman them start forward because they're looking for a husband at that time. So because I was living that monastic, I could see clearly because I wasn't clouded by the lust and these things. So I was making my decision based on, that inner peace and calm. And my wife was the one that was able to provide. So once I got with my wife, I automatically saw her as a blessing from the Almighty because I prayed to the Almighty, I know, because it came down to us, it was like I had a choice because there were certain sisters that were pursuing I heavy that them time there, and I had to make a choice. So I went into my marriage knowing that I had to invest in this, and it wasn't based on anything sexual. It was based on, again, I couldn't articulate it probably the way I'm doing it now in terms of purpose and things, but my wife, I bought her a ticket to Africa. I flew her to Ghana and Ethiopia and just watch her, how she responded. If she had come back from Africa and say, no, I don't like Africa and them things, that she would have been gone. You know what I mean? In reality. But because she communicated, I just was watching, and, as a young Ras, I give thanks, and this is why I give the Most High thanks. Because the things I'm communicating now, I did intuitively. I couldn't have articulated it in the way I am now in terms of the vetting process. But I vetted my queen. And so, I'm now reaping the fruits of that vetting to the level where, my wife could go to Ghana and conduct business without man, with the land purchase and doing things that, I'm able to be here working, earning, and we're working as a team, you know what I mean, interchangeably, because we had alignment in terms of our vision. We wrote a 5-year plan before we got married on paper. We wrote it down and we look at that and laugh because enough of the thing them, we went in a different direction, but some of the thing them we fulfilled, But we had a direction that we agreed to. And again, I was doing these things based on His Majesty, having a 5-year plan based on, as a young Ras, trying to emulate His Majesty. not knowing that I was doing a vetting process, not knowing that I was aligning, making sure that she was aligned with my purpose and all of these things. You know what I mean? My wife, because there was one time I didn't even believe in the institution of marriage on paper. My wife advocated for herself and said, "Me not deal with that, brethren. You know, you're bringing me from Canada into America. Me need some paperwork. You know, that not gonna work." And I had to go in myself. Again, the theory and the practice. I can't have her here as an undocumented person. We have to file some paperwork, and, you know, being a wife and having that legal status makes a big difference in terms of the eyes of the law. So these are things that, for I think I was blessed because of the way I came into the Livity, studying His Majesty. I came in as a skeptic, but it made me study very hard, you know, that His Majesty was married. All of these things, so my worldview was shaped very much by His Imperial Majesty and Empress Menen. So I am a little bit different, whereas a lot of brethren come in through an elder, straight, you know. I came to the elders after I was convinced that His Majesty was who His Majesty was. Now I want to sit up with the elders them and see what them I say. You know what I mean? So I could add, and I've always been that way, a reader, a analytical mind. You know what I mean? That's what draw me to the law, is because of that reasoning and debating and them thing. Them love that. When I was at Howard, we used to debate the Hebrew Israelite, the Islamic brethren. We used to go to war vertically in terms of faith. You know, them time the Malachi Z. York around the road, and they had His Haile Selassie God, so them used to come at way, and we used to go at them. Mormon, when the Church of Latter-day Saint, we invite them, man, they come in and sit down, and we read through the Book of Mormon and dismantle them. You know what I mean? So we went through that kind of opposition period as youth, but again, all of these things helped I in terms of how I vetted my queen to ensure that now we are going through almost a golden era. You know, 16 years in a formal marriage, 20, I think 22 years that we have been together unbroken. My queen is my high school sweetheart. We separated for a time and we came back together. Big up my mother for making that connection. But, you know, the benefits that you have when you have someone that's on your team, they cannot be matched. And again, Empress Menen, when we look at His Majesty, what she did for him as well. Because remember that Empress Menen went against her family. Her family fought a war against His Majesty. You know what I mean? Ras Mikael, who was her uncle, fought a war against His Majesty. Physical war with gunshot and them thing there. And Empress Menen stayed faithful to her king, man. You know what I mean? So having a loyal queen, there's nothing on this planet that can help you to reach your goal faster. And that's what I want to really use this interview to tell our young brethren, or even if you're not Rastafari, and you're listening to the Manosphere, you're listening to Red Pill, Black Pill, Blue Pill, that you have to understand that by the design of the Creator, you know, being with a woman that's been vetted, that is your helpmate in this, because marriage has always been a spiritual union from all cultures across all categories of life. It's always been built in because it's so fundamental to the building blocks of a society. So there's nothing that can match that. I burn Gallus hot because, again, we see the breeder culture Jamaica from slavery, and we see the outcomes, you know, the whole alphabet community that we see now. A lot of that is born out of trauma, you know what I mean? And I look at them as a symptom of a larger system that we have to address as Black people, because historically in our culture we didn't see these things. And I'm not saying that that was never existing on the African continent, but I'm saying that in terms of our societies and our systems, they were based on the union between a man and a woman, whether that was polygamous, whether that was like in Ethiopia, the monogamous through the church. But wherever you see on the continent, it was based on that family structure. And we're not going to have a liberated, free, and prosperous African continent until we rebuild that basic building block.
Please speak about the importance of forgiveness and acceptance in the growth and longevity of a healthy marriage.
For any relationship to work, forgiveness has to be a part of that relationship because we're not perfect. As people, we're going to make mistakes. We're human beings. And remember that marriage is an institution. Just like a company, just like any other institution, there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. And if you harbor resentment and you're not open to forgive, because forgiveness is not for the other person, forgiveness is for yourself. How can you go through life without forgiveness? You're going to end up cutting off everybody in your life. Your parents are going to do things that hurt you. Your children are going to do things that hurt you. So why wouldn't you think the person that you're married to, who is also a human, is not going to do things that are going to hurt you? There's no relationship that we can have on this planet where hurt is not going to be a part. So forgiveness is not for the other person, it's so you yourself can live with a free heart. And wouldn't you also like to be forgiven? Because you within your chud are going to do things to hurt others. Maybe not intentionally, but you're going to do things that hurt others, and you would want that courtesy of forgiveness. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto the I, or the African printers of Ubuntu. I am because we are. You know what I mean? Whatever you take that as, it comes from the principle of forgiveness. I want you to treat I how I would want to be treated. So long-term relationships, I'm sure 1,000%, if you talk to my queen, she would tell you back in the day, something I did that hurt her in some kind of way. But together we are today stronger than ever because she was able to exercise that forgiveness. And without malice, that was actually one of the reasons I knew that she was H.I.M Queen, is because regardless how I was as a youth, not knowing the fullness, trying to be out there in the world, she never held that against I. She was genuine with her love and kindness, because kindness is another key trait in a queen. If she's not kind, then you're not going to have that genuine forgiveness. But this is a key ingredient, and it's the same principle we were talking about earlier with development. Failure is a part of the process, and we have to be aware. And I would urge young brethren and sisters, talk about the possibility of failure. My queen and I have those conversations. What if this happens? My queen tell me, well, this is how I would feel about it and this, but we're going to work through it. So we have those conversations on the front end. So if something happens, I know I can still come to her and say, listen, this is what happened. And we have our contingency. And these may be uncomfortable conversations, but remember that your queen is your extension. So the more that you empower your queen to be resilient, is the better it is going to be for the I. Because you need that person who can really be that anchor for you in this world, that as you face all of these challenges together. As I get older, I lean more into those uncomfortable conversations because now I associate them with progress. When you don't have the uncomfortable conversation, you're not progressing. Comfort is the enemy of progress, and that is very important. So I lean into those, whether it's business, you got to talk about the splits. You know what I mean? Yes, we're all nice and everybody, but we have to have that uncomfortable. You want that, brethren? Why you feel that way? And the earlier we have those conversations, the better it is on the back end, because we've had those conversations in any endeavor. So as you get older and more mature, you learn to lean into that discomfort. And it's just like exercising. I exercise every morning, and it's uncomfortable. I'm sore most of the time. But why? I would rather choose the terms that I deal with that pain than have that pain come to I on terms I don't want. So I know I'm building that strength through that soreness, so that when the time comes for my body to be under exertion, my body is used to that exertion, because that's the norm that I've put on my body. I sprint up hills at 45 years old. You know what I mean? When I do my run in the morning. You know what I mean? Because why? I don't want to lose the ability to sprint. I don't feel good doing it, brethren. I'm doing pull-ups. I don't feel nice when I do my pull-ups then. You know what I mean? I'm trying to maintain a six-pack at 45. Anybody over 40 know the trouble you have, because you eat the little sugary thing there and it's nice and your belly poof out a morning and you say, why? You know, it's not the same as when you're 18, but I have to go through that discomfort. Why? Because I know the benefit that it's going to have for me to do it on my own terms, because pain is a part of life. And one of the principles of the Almighty is that the Almighty put order into chaos. You know, Satan is unrestricted chaos, hedonism, the pleasure principle. You do what you feel like. The Almighty come with order. So when we see His Majesty, that manifestation, we see supreme order in all things when you see Haile Selassie associated in the physical form. When we look at Babylon, we see chaos, anything goes. So the principle has to be you put order and discipline. And I keep coming forward to this principle. Conversation or conversation, we would say, and discipline. These are the principles, and practice versus theory. One of the reasons why practice is so important is because in the practice you learn the things in theory that don't work. And the practice is where the discomfort comes. Medicine, law, all of these things, they call it the practice of medicine, the practice of law, because you'll never reach a state where you know everything. It's constantly evolving. You're practicing, you're learning. And if you take that principle as a person, you will exceed your expectations. You will achieve great things. If you are static, if you believe that you reach a level and you've learned it all and you know it all, you will have initiated your dying process, because we're either growing or we're dying. There's no in between. And even to stay stagnant, you have to be moving, because if you're standing still, you're moving backward. So just to maintain my current physique, I would have to do a lot to maintain where I am now. But if I want to get stronger, I have to go above and beyond. And that's what I try to do in all things, including my marriage. The amount of lyrics my wife gets on a daily basis, you know what I mean? It's rapid. My children don't even like hear me talk to my wife, because lyrics non-stop, they think it's cringe. This is the word they use. But why? I'm not going to save that lyrics for this secretary when I work without a road and my personal assistant. My wife, I forget every lyrics. You know what I mean? Because I want her to love me more than she did the day before. You know what I mean? So these are things that we have to implement as brethren, and that's how you stay sharp within your marriage. I want my wife to look at me through the side of her eye and see the six-pack I ripper. And she feel like, wow, me would have loved touch that little six-pack there. I don't want to make her job hard for her. She'll look upon my big belly. And she said, you know, I love his personality. And she'll try to find out reason for, you know what I mean? Don't do that, brethren. You know what I mean? Give your wife something that she can appreciate love as a man. Put in the work, you know what I mean? And you will get the benefit, because guess what happened now? My wife also know when me touch the road, the other woman, them look for me too. But she'll say, my man, that, you know. She feel proud. You know what I mean? So give your woman something to be proud of, so that she can give you that benefit at home. And I say achievement is an aphrodisiac. When your wife see you achieving, living in your purpose, there's nothing more arousing to a woman to see a man on his purpose. You know what I mean? And this is why we don't put our woman on a pedestal before our purpose. The purpose comes first. Because even for maintain that household, for maintain that sexual tension in the home that is needed for a good marriage, your woman needs to see you progressing and growing and learning and becoming the man that you were destined to be. A lot of men sit on the couch and then wonder why they have to beg for get things from their woman. It's because you're no longer that young, virile man that she fell in love with. So she has to fall in love with the memory, or you're a good person, she has to find reasons for justify, rather than be living in the experience and you're keeping her on her toes because you don't know how you're going to manifest this day and these opportunities. And she sees the opportunities coming and she sees you growing and she's a part of it. And it's a whole exciting journey. We have to give our queens that exciting journey, brethren. We can't just, because a lot of us will give our queen one thing and then the side chick will get the excitement on the side because you bifurcate these things. No. Give your queen, as you said, off camera, you invested in your relationship and that's when it blossomed. We don't overstand as brethren. When you invest in a woman, women's nature is to multiply everything. When a woman is secure, brethren, with your love and feel secure and she's competent and capable, you can't even imagine what she's going to manifest and what she's going to bring forward in terms of value to the table, to what you're doing. And we have to be looking for that, actively seeking that, to make marriage the exciting institution the Almighty intended it to be. Marriage is not boring. Marriage is the most riveting, exciting thing when done correctly. Again, we can go in a tantric realm if we want to do that, called I Queen. And remember, the marriage bed is sacred. So that don't mean say we are going to come around and talk where we are talk. But again, I think we've done an injustice, because as married men, we get all this niceness and we just quiet about it and we just a smile.
Say PR department.
The PR department fail, because we're so glad say we living nice, as married man. We're not telling nobody. And then the people who are single, they're out there because they can't stop chat, because they're trying to compensate for what they're not getting, and to convince themselves what they might do is nicer. So they're out there, I run them mouth every day. So there's an imbalance. So we as married men have to stand up right now and sing from the rooftop, so the young children who grow up in these houses or who don't grow up, because the majority of our community, remember, over 70% might not be in a household that is a married two-parent household. So how are they going to aspire to be in that if the people who are living that are not selling that lifestyle to them?
In one of your early episodes on Lion Voice Network, you spoke about the importance of men putting their purpose over
Boom, boom.
Yeah.
Or that's something there, because we keep it PG. Because my children watch my thing. But I use the word pum pum because it's shocking to hear the Ras sometimes. Yes, we know some of the artists gone there, but you have to be abrupt to break through sometime. The messaging. Purpose over pum pum simply mean what we were talking about throughout this interview. Seek your purpose first. Nothing should derail over your pum pum. That means your purpose come even before your wife. Because to service your wife and to bring that security to your wife, you have to be solidified on your purpose. There's nothing that brings anxiety to a woman more than a man that doesn't know what he wants to do or that's not on his purpose. Women, by their nature, they crave security because they are nurturers. And if they don't get that security, they're not. So a lot of people make the mistake, I want to put my woman on the pedestal before all things, and then their woman end up cheat on them, their woman lose respect for them, because guess what happened, Bridget? You're not on your purpose. So you're not shining through that great divine king that you could be. So purpose come over pum pum is whether you're married, you're single, the purpose has to be here, because you are first and foremost a servant of the Most High. So, and this is why the order of importance is so critical. Seeking the Most High, finding out what your passion is. That means what would you be doing to a high level of proficiency if you were not being paid? What do you do where time just passes and you can't even know because you're so engrossed in it? Find out whatever that is, monetize, create your economic base. Put that first, because again, that's going to be the glue that allows you to bring a woman in, to have her be in love with you and love you for the duration of your marriage, because she believes in the mission. It aligns with her own personal purpose and life mission. This is why she was drawn to you. This is why you vetted her during that process to make sure that through the seasons, through the ups and the downs, she was still as passionate as you were about this passion. So you made her your wife. And when she's your wife, you put that purpose at the forefront so that you could keep that electricity in your union, so that your wife will continue to see you in that high esteem, because she sees that you are an anointed brethren who's on his mission. And that is going to get the River Nile flowing, if you know what I mean, as a brethren. We oftentimes, because of the romantic, they're in TV where the woman is the prize and all of that, we get caught up in all of that. The Almighty is the prize. The purpose is the prize. Everything else shall be added. Seek ye first the kingdom of the Almighty and all the righteousness, and all things shall be added. So everything else is added based on you seeking being at that divine instrument, because being an instrument, the Almighty wants you to have a helper to execute his work in the best way. So the human being is both, the human species is both male and female. So when they say become one flesh, you cannot reach a fullness of who you are without that balance, the female, which is why when you connect with that female, you're able to generate life, that Trinity principle, and you're able to multiply a new life form. So we have to have that purpose to make sure that we're in alignment. And the people you see with happy marriages are typically ones that fall into this configuration. In the comment section, you're going to see a lot of people say, well, me and my wife, there's exceptions to every rule. And a lot of things that we like to do is argue the exception. So because I know Tom and Jerry and they're in a partnership and this and that, or I know Susan and Frank and they're in a partnership and I know this example and it seems to be working well, I want to argue against the basic principle. We cannot do that, family. We have to look at the general, what works since time immemorial. That is what I advocate for. I can't advocate for anything else. And I think because let's be real, Pum Pum is a great motivator. When I was a young man, when I woke up, that was a thought before I went to bed, Miggle Day, we used to go to clubs. That was the motivator, the clothes, everything that you would do. You understand?
If you ask a man about his purpose, right, they'll struggle to tell you, or they'll say they don't know how to go about it.
Yes.
And what I've been telling young guys is that all the skills that you use to get the lady, no, serious thing, you use a lot of different skills. You're negotiating, you're very strategic and all that, consistent. If you use those things towards other things, you'll notice you'll start to achieve them. They don't know how to transfer skill sets to other things.
It's crucial. It's crucial.
There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy dudes use. It's a whole day, week. It's just constant.
When I think about when I was having, in the height of my Gallus run, and you have a multi-woman rotation, think about the time investment into each of those options. Because if one decline, you want to call the next one and all of this. So those relationships have to be maintained. You're investing. Time management. Storytelling. Negotiation, as you say, charisma. Selling a story, of who you are and what you bring to the table. As you say, these are transferable skills. That's one of the things that woke me up against that lifestyle, is when I realized the waste, and that if young men spent that time investing in their purpose, where they would be. If you use your 20s to really dig down, when you have that strength, when you can bleach with ease, because right now it takes tremendous effort for me to stay up all night. As a young man, I could do it, and still wake up and do what I have to do. If you were to take that and invest that into a business or opportunity, and remember, failure is a part, so you would get the opportunity to fail, try again, refine. By your 30, can you imagine where you would be? I can't even imagine where I would be if I had used those years to really invest, the way I know now. So it's so crucial to take the time, and it's uncomfortable. This is why most people don't know what their purpose is, because it's uncomfortable. You have to ask yourself hard questions. You have to try things, because you might have in your mind, I'm a basketball player, aficionado, and you go on the court and a man dunk on you and you feel away because you can't make it when you put your all into something. But you need to know that by putting in the effort, because some of the things in your mind, your head canon, might not gel with the reality of you trying to implement. And it's important as a man that you give yourself the time to fail, because guess what? I might not be the basketball star, but I might find that I'm a good coach. You know what I mean? By doing it and I open up opportunities for myself. I interviewed one of my good brethren, marksman Courtney Charles, who's the vice president of the Raptors. He started off as a coach, just doing scoreboard and thing like that. And then through doing that, he volunteered for the Raptors until he worked his way up to the vice president of basketball operation, wealthy brethren now, because of the fact that he pursued his passion. So you might not know where the passion may even lead you within the sphere of that passion, but doing it allows you to get those failures, to get those successes, so that you can. But if you're focused on the something there, the P, the fatness, the stickety stay, the gumption, the glue. So much names we could have called it. But if you're focused on that, and I know, brethren, it's the greatest thing. But if you're focused on that above your purpose, we see so many brethren that squander their opportunities, that have so much talent and potential, but they have not been able to manifest that. They are poor. They have only a legacy of children that are not taken care of as a result of their activities, and not a legacy of institutions that they've built, success that they can point to. And so we have countless examples of that in our community. We have to change the tide, and we as brethren are responsible. Generation X, I'm calling on the ones them to stand up in this time and make a stand. We can't leave it to the millennials them. They didn't have the same opportunities. They are digital natives. We came in that analog and that bridge. We saw the traditional families, the last of that analog era. We lived it. You know what I mean? So we have a unique opportunity and a unique role, I would say, as well, to break these generational curses, and to start this alternative, because we cannot burn Babylon without creating the alternative to Babylon. And that is the whole encapsulation of my platform, of my purpose, of my plan, is really to be a part of the solution, to really be a part of the building of Zion in our real life. That's what excites I. That's what makes I passionate, is to be a part. I don't want to be part of the reactionary force. The reactionary force is necessary. We have to react to the crisis and this person gets shot and we need a march. That's not I. We need people pushing the front so that when we get the justice from the march, we can pour it into something that's being built already. But if we spend all the time on reaction, we never have a time to create the alternative, and we just go down with Babylon. And that has been the imbalance in our struggle. We spend all the time reacting, and there's only a handful of people that are building the alternative. So I'm really putting out that trumpet call to like-minded brethren to join I&I on I&I platforms, that we can create the solutions for the future, because we need ones who are living the life to share their experience. And I, my mantra is, the time has come for the lions to tell their own story, because this is the lion voice. And I say that because until the lion tells the story, the hunt will always glorify the hunter. That's the African proverb. So we have to take ownership. We have to take control of the narrative. Part of that is self-discipline. Part of that is breaking the generational curse of putting that something there as the primary focus of all of our activity. If you listen to our music, it's geared to do what? Keep us in that lustful, low vibration. This is why I had to leave dancehall. I was a bounty killer, top fanatic fan growing up, you know what I mean? But when I came into Rastafari, I had to leave them thing there. Beanie Man, all of them ones them used to, I was big in the dancehall, because I'm an artist as well. But I had to leave that when I realized that that was taking us nowhere. And they were only singing about what they had seen growing up in the inner city, which is reflecting that trauma. Enough gal and gal in a bongo, gal you have the shape, gal you have the figure. All of these girl tunes, when you look at, these girl tunes, they're not about building families or stable structure. So that was the mantra that I grew up with that helped to govern. So we need a counterbalance to that narrative. And this is where you find I, at this moment, telling the people purpose over pum pum, or purpose over that something there.